Hello, everybody. This is the Catholic Esquire coming back to you again to talk some more about modernism, the heresy, the synthesis of all heresies of modernism. The reason I'm talking about this today is because if you follow Catholic media, actually, it's made it to mainstream media now. There was an interview that Francis did with some Jesuits in Portugal, and he was asked a question about the rigid, backwards looking traditionalists in the United States. And the question encouraged Francis to respond to these traditionalists and their critiques of his supposed teachings, and he did. And so Francis talks a lot about how the traditionalists don't understand that church doctrine can evolve and change, and he brings up some examples such as the death penalty, uh, as doctrines that have changed over time. And what's really disturbing and disgusting, actually, about that whole interview, or it wasn't an interview, it was just a discussion between Francis and some Jesuits. Anyway, what was really disgusting about it is he makes reference to St. Vincent Lérins in support of this idea that church doctrine can change. And St. Vincent Lérins, if you're not aware, was a 5th century church father. And indeed, he very much did talk about this very subject. What was disgusting about the whole thing is that Francis uses St. Vincent's words, twists them in order to support what he was saying as authority that church doctrine or even dogmas can change. St. Vincent was clearly teaching quite the opposite. He was saying, no, church doctrine cannot change. Now, I'm making this video because St. Vincent did make an important distinction, and this distinction that I'm going to talk about today is really at the heart of the dispute between traditionalists and modernists. One of the things I like to specialize in, I suppose, and based on my experience in real life, is really getting down to the root cause of the dispute, a root cause of the issue, because only when you address the root cause of a problem can a problem be solved. And the problem between the traditionalists and the modernists, at the end of the day, when you strip away all the other stuff, it comes down to this notion of what is sacred tradition and how does it work. The modernists will tell you that dogmas and doctrines evolve and they can change over time. And because of that, the church has to adapt to the changing times, to the modern times. And in that way, if you don't agree with that, what happens is you don't really understand tradition and that you're stuck in the past. You're always looking backwards. You're rigid because you're not evolving. And that's why the traditionalists are wrong. But the traditionalist position is they don't deny that church doctrine can develop or even progress. We have to be careful about how we use that word. What they do deny is that church doctrine cannot change. In other words, something that's immoral in 850 AD cannot be objectively considered moral in 1850 AD, simply because times have changed and circumstances are different. Either an act is objectively evil or it's not. But morality itself doesn't change because God doesn't change. His truth doesn't change. So there is a distinction here that we have to draw. And St. Vincent of Lérins does this. It's the distinction between development and change. Francis refers to this statement from St. Vincent, but completely botches it. I don't know if it was done intentionally or if he really doesn't understand how to make the distinction. Quite honestly, once I explain it to you, just like St. Vincent did, it's something that even a 8th grade level person, high school level person can get. So I'll let you decide whether you think this was done maliciously or just out of simple ignorance. What St. Vincent says is that you can understand this issue between change and development by thinking about a human person. When we have a little baby, the baby develops into an adult, correct? Now, do we say, and now this is me ad-libbing, do we say that the baby changes into an adult? Or do we say the baby develops into an adult? Think about that for a second. Why do we say the baby develops into an adult and we don't say a baby changes into an adult? What's the difference between development and change? The difference is, and this is what St. Vincent says, the difference is that change involves a, a change of essence or substance of what something is, whereas development retains the essence or nature of what something is, but builds upon it. That is why St. Vincent very, very much says that we can rightfully claim that to the extent a young baby grows and matures into an adult, while their outward appearance or their outward form appears to be changing, the essence of what that baby is the same. Whereas if if we change the baby into something that does not even look like a human being anymore, for example, something with 4 eyes and 8 legs, now all of a sudden we have a change and not a development. Let's think about this with the death penalty example. If the church teaches by its magisterial authority that the death penalty is a legitimate use of state authority, and that's the original statement. Let's stick with that. What does that statement allow us to do? It certainly leaves some unanswered questions for us, right? Because maybe there are situations where the state cannot morally use the death penalty. For example, if someone is caught shoplifting a candy bar, would the church say it is morally acceptable for the state to utilize the death penalty to execute the shoplifter of a candy bar? Probably not. So there is a condition that's placed on that original statement that it's morally licit or morally acceptable for the state to utilize the death penalty. Perhaps there is another condition that can be placed on it. The method of execution. Do we say it's okay to take the criminal and starve them to death over the course of weeks until they die? Or is it more acceptable to use firing squad? So perhaps the method of the utilization of the death penalty is a condition that can help explain more clearly the original teaching of the church that the use of the death penalty is morally acceptable for the state. That's development. What's not development is to claim, on one hand, that it is morally acceptable for the state to utilize the death penalty, and then in the second statement say, it is not morally acceptable for the state to utilize the death penalty. That is a contradiction. That violates the law of contradiction. That is logically impossible. Well, that's exactly what we have with the death penalty in Francis. And he even references the death penalty as an example he's using to support his idea of modernism in this interview. He says death penalty at once was acceptable and now it's not. That is not development. That is change. Because now you've changed the essence, the nature of the original teaching, from the death penalty is morally acceptable to the death penalty is not morally acceptable. You can't have that. It's a different creature. It's a different statement. It's a different teaching. As opposed to development, where you may place some specific conditions on the use of the death penalty. When you think about it, I think in this way, it's not that hard to understand. But this is ripe field for people who have very disingenuous ideas about what they want to happen with the church, because you can apply these principles to any teaching of the church. For example, sexuality, which is a big one, or perhaps the church's teaching on no women as priests. That's another big one. If you just claim the church's teaching develops or evolves, when they use the word evolve, by the way, they're talking about change, not development. So when you say the church's teachings evolve and you end up with something totally different than what you had before, you end up with a cat when you used to have a dog, that's been condemned by the church. It's been condemned by St. Vincent Lerins, a father of the church. It's been condemned by Pope St. Pius X, a saint and a pope, by the way, who taught with magisterial authority, that very specifically countered exactly, almost word for word, what Francis said in his conversation with the Jesuits. I'm going to be issuing an article, actually, on my website, catholicesquire.org, hopefully by the end of today, where I break down this discussion and use and show you the words of the saints themselves as they counter what Francis says on this very important issue. My friends, traditionalists have to get this issue of tradition correct. We have to understand what tradition is and how it works. This is the core of the dispute between the modernist heretics and the traditionalists. This video is just a way to get the topic going, to help you start thinking about this, the difference between development and change. Please check out my article I'll be posting later today on catholicesquire.org as well. I hope this is helpful. I hope this is useful. If so, please share the video, please like the video, and subscribe to the channel. Thank you for listening. Pope St. Pius X, pray for us.